This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal Podcast, we have Joseph Schiller. He is the author of a new book called Upon the Arrival of Dawn. And we're going to find out all about his whole writing journey, how he got here, all this type of thing. What's the book about? It's going to be great. So welcome, Joseph, to the Cameron Journal Podcast.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Cameron.
Thank you. Thank you. So why don't we start from the beginning? Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started writing.
Okay, I guess my day job, I'm a high school history teacher in Houston, Texas. So writing is, I guess, a side passion, if you will. I guess in terms of when I start, my passion for writing prose actually began when I was in the seventh grade. Had an opportunity to take an elective, which is a creative writing class. And the teacher was super supportive of just letting us write and not really judging what we were writing or why we were writing it, just letting it be what it was. And I really began exploring my inner voice and my inner story that way. And I've kind of been writing various things off and on since, but nothing that really gained traction. This is the first book that gained traction for me, that I was able to kind of see it through. So
it's always hard to get that first one off the ground, isn't it?
It is, but what's funny about that is you don't realize how hard it is until you've gone through the journey, like that first initial journey. Because you can look back, right? You can look back and be like, oh yeah, but yes, you're right. Because there are ideas that you have, and when you begin that process, you're thinking, okay, this is going to be fabulous. There's got a lot of potential. And then, once you kind of get through it a little bit, you realize, maybe the idea wasn't quite what I had initially expected, but yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of, I think people underestimate how many times there are false starts, which was certainly true for my first novel. I wrote 7 different versions before I found one that worked. But I think people kind of underestimate that false start thing and all this sort of thing. And then also writing, like everything else, is a skill that takes time to develop. And even if you're a seasoned short story writer or all this type of thing, there's something about book length that just totally changes the game.
I absolutely agree. I think everyone's story or the stories that they have in their head come in a million varieties. And I think that's my imagination doesn't quite go to the depth that some people can really, they can break down a scene in a way that I just don't know that I have the capability of really imagining. I think there's definitely something, Yeah, like the guys who are writing 800-page books, I don't know. I don't. How long are yours?
Oh, not quite that extreme. My first novel was 54,000 words. It's exactly 231 pages.
Okay,
Um,
that's exactly the same as mine then.
yeah, my short story collection is 60,000 words spread across nine short stories, one of whom is almost a novella. So it's about 350 pages.
Okay.
So my next book will be much longer. I'm right now finishing my thesis project for my Master's of Fine Arts program.
Oh, right.
Um,
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. And I will probably bring that book in at 100,000. And right
Okay.
now I'm at 69 thereabouts. So I
Okay.
have a lot of work to do in a very short period of time. So yeah, no, people do. I mean, you look like Robert Jordan, Wheel of Time. Those books are huge, and
Yeah.
there's 13 of them. You know, or George R. R. Martin. The Game of Thrones books are massive.
Yeah.
They're bricks. You can build houses with them. You know.
Yeah. I am impressed with the speed to which some individuals are able to process their thoughts, process their ideas, process that creativity. Because I'm not anywhere, and I guess they started somewhere. So there's one thing that someone told me a couple of years ago, another author, and he said that you have to write every day. You have to constantly be writing or jotting things down or getting thoughts on the paper. That's the easiest way of, I guess, like exercising well, like you were saying, like like you have to constantly, yeah, like exercising a muscle just like you would an athlete, right? So
Yeah. No, it is something that you have to be doing and working on every single day, which is I always counted myself lucky that I have other skills and was able to write full time because when I'm
oh,
like
okay.
working full time, I have no energy to write creatively whatsoever. Um I in 2016 I left this business and went back to work. I didn't write a word for probably 2 or 3 years. Or if I
Oh,
did, it was like once every couple of weeks, I'd have an idea, I'd write it down, or I'd write down a short scene or whatever have you. So I mean, after years and years of doing it and all this type of thing, I just kind of wanted to leave that behind for a while. And then
yeah.
when I restarted the business, then it got back to the whole, oh crap, we're doing this every day thing. And then I went to grad school and that was just like the, oh, we're gonna do this for life thing. Okay, great. So yeah, so now let's talk about the book itself.
Okay.
Let's get into all of that. Describe what it's fantasy sci-fi, which is interesting. So what have you got? What is it about?
Um, as you said, it's got a blending of some of the sci-fi and fantasy themes. Essentially, the characters are based on kind of the Judeo-Christian Islamic mythology behind the angels of death. And I essentially picked two of I guess, the more well-known archetypes of the angels of death. Our protagonist is Azrael, and our antagonist is Samael. And essentially, what we are faced with in the beginning of the book is a situation in which our protagonist, Azrael, is identifying and discovering something's happening in existence across the universe, and a growing imbalance in existence, being caused by some celestial essence that he does not quite yet know who that is, or what the ultimate plot is. But over time, he discovers who this is, and it discovers that it is in fact his counterpart Samael. Um, and he is faced with the reality of either of essentially being the only one that has the celestial power to stand up to Samael's wickedness um, uh, and rebalance existence. Essentially, there are some kind of metaphysical and slash philosophical musings kind of thrown in that are based on what I would imagine a celestial being would feel and think on various topics. So I kind of try to put myself in that position. Okay, how would this essence believe or feel or understand different realities of existence to be? And so we got some of that thrown in there. There's a hint at romance that I wasn't initially when I initially kind of brainstormed the story. I didn't have the initial intention, but it just kind of organically fell into place. So there's a hint at romance that really doesn't more toward the end of the book, but kind of a marginal theme.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, how does one date when you're an archangel?
Well, and that's kind of one of the subtopics that's dealt with is the relationship between celestial essences and mortal creatures, right? So
right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is that I imagine would be quite difficult. There's no Tinder for archangels, so you know. That's excellent. So now you kind of talk about, we talked about process and all that type of thing, and you kind of started this. What is it about fantasy and sci-fi that's compelling?
I think it allows you to fully explore your creativity and kind of just the you're not in I feel like if you're doing nonfiction, you are somewhat limited by fact, right?
True.
You're limited by. I mean, you can go. I mean, you can do quite a bit on the fictional side of it, but you're still somewhat limited, aren't we? But with fantasy and sci-fi, there is nothing keeping you from exploring to whatever degree and extent and direction you want to go. No one can refute because there's nothing. It's not. It's. I mean, I suppose if you did something that was based on some science, that you would have to have. But then that falls more closely into I would say a historical fiction rather than. So like a Jurassic Park, for example. Crichton had. I imagine him spending hours of research on some of the cutting edge science behind his books. But if you're doing sci-fi where it's 100% made up or fantasy, I mean you just do whatever you want and
yeah.
I mean, in the way Tolkien, right? Just literally create your whole new world.
No, indeed, indeed. No, that's it. I do enjoy the flexibility of something like that. Do you think you'd ever write historical fiction?
I actually am working on one right now based on the Greek mathematician Pythagoras and some of the kind of the esoteric mysticism behind him. So it'll still be it'll still be largely fiction, but there has to be elements of historical background that are thrown in. So yeah. So I guess that would be my first foray into something relatively historical fiction.
No, that's really cool. No, it just seems kind of, given your being a history teacher, it just kind of seems like it'd be something very natural to, you'd find some really weird thing in history to write about. And
yeah.
So,
well, I actually, the book on Pythagoras, I actually started probably 12 or 13 years ago, but set it aside because this book that Upon the Arrival of Dawn, I started getting traction on it, just like creatively. And it was one of those situations where I let that take me. And so this book on Pythagoras kind of took a sidestep. So, but you're right. I definitely feel a gravity towards some historical basis. I mean, even this book, while it's mythological, those are stories that are also relatively historical because they show these are figures that show up in the Bible, for example. And while the Bible is mythological in nature, a lot of the stories are passed down almost semi-historic in some cultures. So
No, no, that is no, I mean that is true. Like we have our, our myths and our legends and even urban myths and all this type of thing, and people believe them, and those stories are have a great deal of cultural potency. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that is you can't and I think people have to remember, a lot of the stuff, at one like even with like Greek mythology, at one time that was somebody's religion, you
it
know.
was.
And even when you look at, things like the Bible, it's like a lot of the Bible is the history of a people, in addition to everything else. It's also kind of like here we came from and how's how we got here and all this sort of thing. And so um those stories are informative and indicative of that. So I think that's interesting um, as well, and how you kind of pull all that together. So and let's talk about process. How do you like to write? Where do you like to write? Do you write longhand? Do you type at home, at a coffee shop? What's your ideal location?
So I would say I fought the efficiency for a long time of going from handwriting to typing it out. Um, and it got to a point where the efficiency won out. It's just easier just to type it out because you can make so many quick edits and quick changes, and it won out. But I would say, yeah, I definitely, I'm definitely, typing out in Google Docs, Microsoft Word. I don't necessarily have any particular consistent place that I write. Um, in fact, 9 times out of 10, I'm at the dining room table, sitting out, just sitting there, largely because I can kind of keep an eye on the kids at the same, while I'm doing what I need to do.
Right, right.
But yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people, they have a place and that's the only place that they can kind of, divest themselves of what's going on. Unfortunately, I don't have that luxury. Um, but I definitely work, I would say, on a daily. Now, this is something that I learned kind of the hard way and the long way, and that is that you have to write every day. So while I did not start off writing every day, I did get to a place where a couple of years ago where that it has become the case. So I even if it's and I think you mentioned it, that when you're working, sometimes you can only crank out one scene or whatever. And that is the case with me. So sometimes it's a page, sometimes it's a couple of pages. Sometimes I just reread something because all I got is half an hour. So I would say it's kind of a slow and steady process for me as opposed to like big chunks.
No, no, definitely. No, I think it's important for people to hear and understand, yeah, you're working at the kitchen table so you can keep an eye on the kids and make sure they don't burn the house down. Like, I think people get these ideas about, writing and all this type of thing. But I know somebody, talk about inefficiency. He writes longhand, types it on a typewriter, then types that into his computer.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, for me, like I used to write longhand and then would type it up, and that became too time consuming and efficient. So I just started
Yeah,
typing.
exactly.
Um, but I'm kind of like, you're creating all this extra work for yourself unnecessarily for the
Yep.
finished product sort of thing. And now fortunately he is actually also a teacher. He teaches English at a private school in Atlanta. And he has two kids, but they're kind of older. They're teenagers. So I think that's how he can kind of get away with that. But it's to me it's a little crazy. To have that sort of thing. But I think people need to hear about that because it's not as necessarily always glamorous as people think it is, right?
Right.
You know.
You know, I don't know any well-known authors. Most of the authors, like yourself and a few other people that I've talked to, we're just like your average individual. We have the same. We have these very kind of ordinary. We have day jobs, we have families, we have just average responsibilities. There's nothing. I mean, so for me, I don't even know what it's like to, you know, to not have to cram in the spaces I have available to me. Time, right. Like if I have half an hour, that's what I have. The next day I might have 15. Next time I have half. But
no, I think I am so envious of you for that. You have no idea because I can't do that at all. If I don't have blocks of time, my brain is in 50 other places. Like I need like blocks of time for creativity to come out. I have always been envious of the people that are like, oh yeah, I wrote my first book sitting in the car at my kids' soccer matches. I'm like, okay, oh my God.
That's on another level.
Like or like oh I have like 20 minutes on break at work and so that's when I write and I'm just kind of like oh my God, how do you get it to turn on like that? Like it's remarkable. I'm so envious of people like you who can just take those short chunks of time and string them together into something because my brain refuses and it sucks.
Well, I will say that because of that, the writing process is slower. This book took me 10 years because of the starting and stopping. Just to give you an example, let's say I wanted to work on revising a chapter. I spend 45 minutes. I may get through half the chapter, but because I have to go back and the next day I have to go back and I almost have to reread the first half that I edited just so I can remember the thought process that I was in when I was revising that. So it's difficult to get efficient. It's difficult to get into a rhythm. But those are part of this. I guess at the end of the day though, if you're serious about this passion, you do what you got to do with the time you got. And
yeah. No, absolutely. Well, my friend, it's been a pleasure meeting to you and talking to you. Why don't you tell us where we can follow you online?
Okay. I am on Facebook, facebook.com/upon the arrival of dawn. You can find me on my website, josephschiller.weebly.com/authorship. You can go to bookshop.org or indiebound.org to find my book. If I support local bookstores, so that's why I'm going to give it. Since my books in 16 bookstores. We don't have time for me to list them off. So the easiest way to support indie books and indie bookstores is to buy from bookshop.org or indiebound.com.
Excellent. Well, I love the independent bookstore thing. I live in Seattle, so we love a good independent bookstore up here. So
hey, there's a bookstore in Bellingham that's selling.
Yes. Village Books, I imagine.
Yes, it is.
Yes, that's actually technically in Fairhaven, but yes, that's one of my absolute favorite places in the entire world. Yes, it is one of my. It is one of the. I could just live in there. Like I could just set up a small bed and just. It is one of my favorite places in the world.
Well, then that makes me feel even better about it being in that bookstore.
Yes, no, it is a wonderful, magical place. It is a huge draw for book people throughout our entire region, which keeps
Oh,
them going. Yeah, no, they're never not busy. Like, I'm talking like they have two people at the check stand. It's three levels. They have a coffee shop on the second floor. They are very involved in the literary community, all this type of thing. They are one, and they're also owned by great people, ran by great people. Just an absolutely wonderful, delightful location.
yeah. Laura was one of the first people to like say, "Yeah, I want to support you," and so
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah, I absolutely love them. So the fact that you're, hanging out with them and you've
mhm.
got them, selling your book is, to me, that's the biggest endorsement right there. Like, of course, everyone needs to go buy his book. If it's a Village Books in Fairhaven, it must be good. So, so excellent. Well, thank you for coming on the Cameron Journal
Cameron, thank you for
podcast.
your time, man. I appreciate it.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.